I'm Emma Johnson, 26 years old, and I used to believe that blood was thicker than water. I thought family meant showing up for each other, celebrating victories together, and standing united when it mattered most. For years, I convinced myself that when my wedding day arrived, my parents and sister would finally put aside their dismissive attitudes and be there for me. I imagined my mom helping me with my dress, my dad walking me down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and my sister Jessica standing beside me as my maid of honor. What I got instead was a reality check so brutal it changed me forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. They didn't just decline my invitation with some flimsy excuse, they made it crystal clear that my wedding was an inconvenience, a distraction from what they considered the real event worth celebrating. My sister Jessica, the golden child who could do no wrong, had announced her engagement to Tyler just 2 weeks before my wedding date, and suddenly my special day became nothing more than a scheduling conflict they needed to eliminate. But here's what they didn't know about me. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to plead or cry or make desperate phone calls asking them to reconsider. Instead, I used every connection, every favor, and every professional skill I'd built over years in the wedding industry to ensure that when they inevitably changed their minds and showed up expecting to waltz in and play happy family for the cameras, they'd find themselves locked out completely. I made sure the only view they'd get of my perfect day would be from the parking lot, watching through locked gates as I celebrated with people who actually loved and valued me. The look on their faces when they realized I'd outplayed them at their own game of family politics was worth every moment of pain they'd put me through. Some people might call what I did petty or cruel, but I call it justice. After 26 years of being treated like a backup plan, I finally showed them what it felt like to be the one left standing outside looking in. Growing up in Riverside, California, I learned early that love in the Johnson household came with conditions and requirements that I never seemed to meet. Our neighborhood on Maple Street was the kind of place where every lawn was perfectly manicured, every house painted in acceptable neutral tones, and every family competed silently to present the most successful image to their neighbors. My parents, Carol and Dennis Johnson, had built their entire identity around this competition, and unfortunately for me, I was never going to be their winning ticket. Carol worked as a real estate agent specializing in luxury homes, spending her days showing million-dollar properties to wealthy clients and absorbing their lifestyle aspirations like a sponge. She'd come home each evening with stories about marble countertops and infinity pools, speaking about these material markers of success with the kind of reverence most people reserved for sacred things. Dennis managed a regional office for a major insurance company, a position that came with a decent salary, a respectable title, and just enough authority to feed his need to feel important. Together they'd worked their way into the country club scene, where they spent weekends networking with other ambitious suburban families and comparing notes on their children's achievements. The problem was that they had two very different daughters, and only one of us fit their vision of success. Jessica, 3 years older than me, had been their pride and joy from the moment she could walk. She was the kind of child who instinctively understood what adults wanted to hear and delivered it with a smile that could light up a room. Even as a toddler, she seemed to grasp that life was a performance, and she was determined to be the star of every show. By the time Jessica reached high school, she'd already mapped out a path that had our parents practically glowing with pride. She talked about business school and finance careers with the confidence of someone who'd been born understanding spreadsheets and stock markets. Our parents hung on her every word, treating her college planning sessions like strategic military campaigns. When she announced she wanted to study business at UCLA, they didn't just support her decision, they turned it into a family celebration that lasted weeks. I, on the other hand, discovered photography when I was 12 years old. Mrs. Angela Rodriguez, my art teacher, had introduced our class to old film cameras, and something about the process of capturing light and shadow, of freezing moments in time, spoke to something deep in my soul. I'd spend hours after school in the dark room she'd set up, watching images slowly emerge in the chemical baths like magic. Mrs. Rodriguez saw my passion and encouraged it, but when I came home excited about a photograph I'd taken or a technique I'd learned, my parents' response was always the same polite but distant smile that said they were humoring a child's phase. The contrast in how they treated our interests became more obvious as we got older. When Jessica joined the debate team, our parents attended every tournament, cheering from the audience and taking her team out for celebration dinners afterward. When I won my first photography contest at 15, submitting a black and white portrait series that captured the diverse faces of our community, my mom glanced at the certificate and said it was nice before immediately shifting the conversation to Jessica's latest academic achievement. I learned to stop expecting enthusiasm from them, but I never stopped hoping that eventually they'd see my work the way Mrs. Rodriguez did. She'd frame my best photographs and display them in the school hallway, pointing them out to other teachers and visiting parents with genuine pride. She helped me apply for summer photography workshops and even drove me to my first real gallery opening when I was 16, where one of my pieces was selected for a youth exhibition. That night, surrounded by strangers who genuinely appreciated my artistic vision, I felt more seen and valued than I ever had at home. Meanwhile, Jessica's achievements continued to pile up like trophies on a shelf. She graduated valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to UCLA, and had already secured internships at prestigious companies before she even finished her freshman year. Our parents couldn't contain their pride, sharing her accomplishments with anyone who would listen. The country club friends, the neighbors, even random strangers in checkout lines heard about Jessica's latest triumph. Dennis would beam as he explained her career trajectory, and Carol would practically glow when other parents complimented Jessica's success. During my senior year of high school, while Jessica was excelling at UCLA, I was building my own portfolio and applying to programs that would help me turn my passion into a profession. I'd been working part-time at a local photography studio, learning the business side of the industry and discovering that I had a natural talent for working with clients and capturing their most important moments. The owner, recognizing my potential, offered me a full-time position after graduation with the opportunity to eventually take over some of his wedding photography contracts. When I told my parents about this opportunity, their reaction was painfully predictable. Dennis frowned and asked if I'd considered something more stable like business school or even community college for a practical degree. Carol suggested that photography might be a nice hobby, but wouldn't I rather focus on finding a career with better financial prospects? Neither of them seemed to understand that I wasn't talking about a hobby or a temporary job. I was describing my calling, the thing that made me feel most alive and creative and purposeful. The summer after high school graduation, while Jessica was interning at a prestigious investment firm in Los Angeles and sending home glowing reports about her mentor and her projects, I was working 12-hour days at the photography studio, learning everything I could about lighting, composition, client relations, and business management. I assisted on dozens of weddings that summer, watching couples celebrate the most important day of their lives and feeling honored to be trusted with capturing those precious moments forever. By fall, I'd saved enough money to enroll in a photography and visual arts program at UC San Diego, choosing a school that would give me both technical training and creative freedom. My parents paid my tuition without complaint, but their attitude made it clear they viewed this as an expensive phase I needed to get through before settling down to something more serious. Jessica, meanwhile, was thriving in her business program, already talking about graduate school and making connections that would serve her throughout her career. The difference in how my parents discussed our respective futures was stark and painful. Jessica's education was an investment in the family's success story, something that would elevate all of us and provide returns for years to come. My education was an indulgence, something they tolerated because they loved me but didn't really understand or value.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
When relatives asked about their daughters at family gatherings, Jessica's updates took center stage while my accomplishments were mentioned briefly, almost apologetically, before the conversation moved on to more interesting topics. College became my sanctuary, a place where my artistic vision was not only accepted but celebrated. I met professors who pushed me to explore new techniques and challenged me to think about photography as both art and communication. More importantly, I met Ryan Mitchell in my second year, a graphic design student who understood creative passion in a way my family never had. Ryan saw my work and immediately grasped what I was trying to express, offering thoughtful critiques and genuine enthusiasm that fed my artistic soul. I also connected with Mia Patterson, my roommate who was studying marketing and who became the sister I'd always wanted Jessica to be. Mia celebrated my successes, listened to my family frustrations, and never made me feel like my dreams were impractical or naive. She'd stay up late with me in the dark room, keeping me company while I perfected prints for exhibitions, and she was always my most enthusiastic supporter at student art shows. Through college, I continued to build my professional portfolio, taking on freelance wedding photography jobs on weekends and during breaks. Each wedding taught me something new about capturing emotion, managing complex family dynamics, and delivering images that would be treasured for generations. I developed relationships with vendors throughout the industry, from florists to caterers to venue managers, learning that success in wedding photography required not just artistic skill but also business savvy and the ability to navigate high-stress situations with grace. My parents remained politely disinterested in my growing success, even when I started earning enough from weekend weddings to cover my own living expenses. They'd ask generic questions about school but never seemed to retain any details about my actual projects or achievements. Meanwhile, every conversation included updates about Jessica's internships, her networking events, her academic honors, and her growing reputation in the finance world. The pattern became so predictable that I stopped trying to share exciting news with them. When I won a regional college photography competition, I told Mrs. Rodriguez first, knowing she'd understand the significance of the achievement. When I landed my first high-paying wedding client, a prominent Riverside family who'd chosen me based on my portfolio rather than the studio's reputation, I celebrated with Ryan and Mia instead of calling home. I was learning to find validation from people who actually valued my work, but there was still a part of me that longed for my parents' approval and pride. By my senior year, I'd built enough of a reputation to start planning my own photography business after graduation. I'd saved money, cultivated client relationships, and even secured a small studio space in Riverside's Arts District. Jessica, meanwhile, had been accepted to UCLA's prestigious MBA program and was already fielding job offers from major financial firms. The contrast in my parents' reactions to our post-graduation plans was everything I'd come to expect. Jessica's future was discussed with excitement and strategic planning sessions, while my business plans were met with gentle suggestions that I might want to keep my options open for more traditional career paths. After graduation, I threw myself into building my photography business with the determination of someone who had something to prove. I specialized in weddings and engagement photography, discovering that I had a gift for making couples feel comfortable and capturing the authentic emotions that made each celebration unique. Word spread quickly through Riverside's wedding industry, and within 6 months I was booking clients faster than I could handle them alone. The success was intoxicating, not just financially but emotionally. Couples trusted me with their most precious memories, vendors recommended me to their clients, and venues started keeping my business cards on hand for brides who needed a photographer. I was building something real and meaningful, creating art that brought joy to people's lives while supporting myself entirely through my own efforts. But even as my business thrived, my parents remained focused on Jessica's achievements. She'd graduated with highest honors, landed a position at Morgan Stanley in Los Angeles, and was already being mentored by senior executives who saw her potential for rapid advancement. Carol and Dennis couldn't stop talking about her salary, her benefits package, her downtown Los Angeles apartment, and her promising future in finance. They'd share these updates with country club friends, neighbors, and anyone else who would listen, beaming with pride about their successful daughter. My own success, meanwhile, was treated like a pleasant surprise rather than something worth celebrating. When I told them I'd booked my first celebrity client, a local news anchor whose wedding photos ended up in a regional magazine, they nodded politely and then asked if I'd heard about Jessica's latest promotion. When I expanded my business to include event planning services, leveraging my industry connections to offer comprehensive wedding packages, they wondered aloud if I shouldn't consider this a stepping stone to something more stable rather than a long-term career. The frustration was building, but I'd learned to channel it into fuel for my ambition. Every dismissive comment, every time they changed the subject from my achievements to Jessica's, every moment I felt invisible in my own family pushed me to work harder and prove them wrong. I wasn't going to beg for their attention or approval anymore. I was going to build something so successful, so undeniably impressive, that they'd have to acknowledge my worth. What I didn't realize yet was that some people are so invested in their preconceived notions that no amount of success can change their minds. My parents had decided long ago that Jessica was their star and I was their supporting character, and nothing I accomplished professionally was going to alter that fundamental dynamic. The real test of our family relationships was still coming, and it would arrive in the form of wedding invitations, competing celebrations, and a choice that would reveal exactly where their priorities truly lay. Mrs. Rodriguez, my former art teacher who had remained a mentor and friend over the years, was more direct in her assessment. During a coffee meeting where I was sharing some of my frustrations about family dynamics, she listened carefully before saying, "Emma, some people are so committed to their version of reality that they'll ignore obvious evidence to maintain it. Your parents decided long ago who you were supposed to be in their story, and they're not interested in revising that narrative based on who you actually are." Her words stung because they rang so true. My parents had invested so much of their identity in Jessica's success story that acknowledging my achievements would require them to admit they'd been wrong about me for years. It was easier to maintain their existing beliefs than to confront the possibility that they'd overlooked something valuable in their younger daughter. This wasn't about my actual accomplishments or potential, it was about their psychological need to preserve a worldview that had guided their parenting decisions for decades. The realization was both liberating and devastating. Liberating because it meant I could stop trying to earn something that was never going to be available, and devastating because it confirmed that my childhood suspicions about my place in the family were accurate. I wasn't going to magically become their priority by achieving more, working harder, or proving my worth through professional success. The game was rigged, and I'd been playing it my entire life without understanding the rules. As my wedding date approached, I found myself oscillating between hope and resignation about my parents' level of involvement. Part of me still believed that my actual wedding day would be different, that seeing me as a bride would trigger some parental instinct that had been dormant during the planning process. Maybe the sight of me in my wedding dress would remind them of the little girl who used to dream about her wedding day, or maybe the gravity of the occasion would help them understand how much their presence and enthusiasm meant to me. But their behavior during the final weeks of preparation suggested otherwise. While Jessica was receiving daily check-ins about her wedding progress and constant offers of assistance with any remaining tasks, my parents' communication with me became increasingly sporadic and distracted. Carol would call occasionally to ask general questions about my plans, but these conversations felt obligatory rather than genuine, like items being checked off a mental list rather than expressions of real interest or excitement. The breaking point came 3 weeks before my wedding, during what should have been a celebratory family dinner. Ryan and I had joined my parents and Jessica at their favorite restaurant to discuss final details for both upcoming weddings. The evening started pleasantly enough, with casual conversation about work and weather that allowed everyone to avoid potentially sensitive topics about wedding planning disparities. But as the meal progressed, the conversation naturally shifted to the upcoming celebrations. Jessica launched into an enthusiastic description of her final dress fitting, explaining how perfectly everything was coming together for her October wedding. She talked about the custom alterations that had been completed, the matching shoes she'd found after weeks of searching, and the family jewelry Carol had offered to lend her for something borrowed. Her excitement was infectious, and even Ryan found himself drawn into the conversation, asking thoughtful questions about her plans and offering genuine congratulations on how beautiful everything sounded. Carol and Dennis hung on Jessica's every word, asking follow-up questions about details that seemed insignificant to me but apparently fascinated them. When Jessica mentioned that her florist had suggested adding white roses to the already elaborate centerpieces, Carol immediately offered to call the florist herself to discuss the additional expense and ensure Jessica got exactly what she wanted. When Jessica worried aloud about whether her chosen lipstick shade would photograph well, Dennis suggested hiring a makeup artist for trial runs to guarantee perfection. Their level of investment in these minute details was remarkable, especially when contrasted with their response to my wedding planning needs. Throughout the months of preparation, I'd handled similar concerns on my own, researching solutions and making decisions without the kind of collaborative family support Jessica was receiving. When I'd mentioned concerns about weather contingencies for my outdoor ceremony, my parents had offered vague reassurances that everything would work out fine. When Jessica expressed identical concerns about her reception logistics, they immediately began brainstorming backup plans and researching professional solutions. As Jessica's monologue about wedding preparations continued, I waited for a natural pause that would allow me to share some of my own final planning updates. Ryan had recently surprised me with arrangements for a string quartet to play during our ceremony, and I was excited to tell my family about this romantic addition to our celebration. I'd also finalized our honeymoon plans, booking a photography workshop tour through New Zealand that would combine our love of travel with professional development opportunities. But every time the conversation seemed to shift away from Jessica's wedding, someone would ask another follow-up question about her plans, or she would remember another detail she wanted to share. The dinner stretched on with Jessica as the primary focus of attention, while Ryan and I became increasingly quiet observers of a family celebration that didn't seem to include us despite our presence at the table. Finally, during a brief lull in Jessica's wedding commentary, I attempted to contribute something about my own preparations. Ryan surprised me with the most amazing wedding gift, I began, hoping to share the news about the string quartet and maybe generate some of the enthusiasm that had greeted every detail of Jessica's planning. He arranged for musicians to play during our ceremony, and they're going to perform some pieces that are really meaningful to our relationship. Carol smiled politely and said that sounded lovely, but before I could elaborate on the specific songs or explain why they were significant to us, Jessica interrupted with sudden excitement about her own musical arrangements. "Oh, that reminds me, Tyler and I just finalized our reception playlist with the DJ, and we found the perfect song for our first dance. It's the same song that was playing when we first met at that networking event, and Tyler had the DJ create a special extended version so we can really showcase the dancing lessons we've been taking." The conversation immediately pivoted back to Jessica's wedding, with Carol and Dennis expressing fascination about the dancing lessons and asking detailed questions about the choreography they'd learned. My mention of the string quartet was completely forgotten, swept aside in favor of more compelling details about Jessica's celebration. Ryan reached under the table to squeeze my hand, a silent acknowledgement of how I'd just been ignored in favor of Jessica's more interesting story. The pattern continued throughout the rest of the dinner. Every attempt I made to share news or updates about my wedding was either politely acknowledged and quickly forgotten, or overshadowed by something more exciting happening with Jessica's celebration. When I mentioned our honeymoon plans, Dennis made a brief comment about New Zealand being a nice destination before asking Jessica about the luxury resort she and Tyler had chosen for their European tour. When I brought up how well the final venue preparations were going, Carol nodded approvingly before launching into a detailed discussion of Jessica's reception layout and seating chart challenges. By the end of the evening, I felt completely invisible despite having been present for the entire conversation. Jessica had dominated the discussion for over 2 hours, with Carol and Dennis hanging on her every word and contributing enthusiastic support for every aspect of her planning. Meanwhile, my wedding had been mentioned in passing, treated like a pleasant side note rather than a major family event worthy of attention and excitement. Ryan was unusually quiet during the drive home, and I could tell he was processing what he'd witnessed. Finally, he said, "I've never seen anything like that, it was like you weren't even there." Despite being part of the conversation, "I don't understand how they can be so excited about Jessica's wedding and so disinterested in ours." His observation confirmed what I'd been feeling but hadn't wanted to articulate, even to myself. The dinner had crystallized something that had been building for months. My parents genuinely didn't view my wedding as an important family event. In their minds, it was Emma's nice celebration that deserved polite support, while Jessica's wedding was the family's major cultural moment that required maximum investment and attention. This wasn't about the size or expense of the celebrations, it was about fundamental differences in how they valued their daughter's happiness and milestones. That realization forced me to confront some difficult questions about what I actually expected from my wedding day and what I was willing to accept from my family. Did I want parents who attended my wedding out of obligation while mentally planning Jessica's celebration? Did I want wedding photos that captured their polite disinterest rather than genuine joy? Did I want my special day shadowed by the knowledge that they were counting down the minutes until they could return to more important family business? The answers to those questions were becoming clearer, but I wasn't yet ready to act on them. There was still a part of me that hoped the actual wedding day would be different, that seeing me as a bride would awaken some parental pride that had been dormant during the planning process. Maybe the ceremony itself would remind them of what really mattered, or maybe the celebration would help them understand how much their enthusiasm and support meant to me. But their behavior during the final weeks before my wedding suggested that my hopes were unrealistic. Carol called sporadically to check on last-minute details, but these conversations felt perfunctory rather than excited. When I mentioned that I was nervous about the weather forecast, she offered generic reassurances without really engaging with my concerns. When I shared that I'd found the perfect jewelry to complement my dress, she made appropriate sounds of approval before quickly changing the subject to ask if I'd talked to Jessica recently about her final preparations. Dennis was even more distant, treating my wedding like a social obligation he needed to fulfill rather than a celebration of his daughter's happiness. When I called to confirm that he was still planning to walk me down the aisle, he assured me he'd be there but didn't seem particularly moved by the significance of that role. When I mentioned how much it would mean to have his support and presence on such an important day, he replied with platitudes about being proud of me and wanting me to be happy, but his tone suggested he was going through the motions rather than expressing genuine emotion. The contrast with their excitement about Jessica's upcoming wedding was stark and painful. Every conversation with them included updates about Jessica's final preparations, enthusiastic discussions of her wedding timeline, and detailed analysis of every vendor choice and design decision. They spoke about her October celebration with anticipation and pride, as if they were personally invested in every aspect of her special day. Meanwhile, my April wedding seemed to be something they needed to get through before they could focus on the event that really mattered to them. This became especially clear when Carol mentioned that they were planning to take a vacation between my wedding and Jessica's to recharge before the big celebration. The implication that Jessica's wedding was the big celebration while mine was apparently the warm-up act was impossible to ignore. 2 weeks before my wedding, I had a conversation with Mia that helped clarify what I was really dealing with. We were addressing final invitations for a small welcome dinner Ryan and I had planned for out-of-town guests, and she asked how my parents were feeling about the upcoming celebration. When I described their lukewarm engagement and obvious preoccupation with Jessica's future wedding, Mia was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Emma, you know I love you and I want your wedding to be perfect," she said carefully. "But I'm worried that you're setting yourself up for disappointment by expecting something from your parents that they've never been able to give you."
Shown you for years that Jessica's achievements matter more to them than yours. Why would your wedding be any different? Her question forced me to confront the possibility that I was indeed being unrealistic about what my wedding day could accomplish in terms of family relationships. Maybe I was hoping that the significance of the occasion would somehow overcome decades of established patterns, or maybe I was still trying to earn the kind of parental pride and enthusiasm that had never been available to me. "I guess I keep thinking that this is different," I admitted. "This isn't just another achievement or milestone, this is me starting a family of my own, making a commitment that's supposed to last forever. If they can't get excited about this, when will they ever care about anything in my life?" Mia's expression was sympathetic but realistic. Maybe the answer is never, and maybe that's not about you or anything you've done wrong. Maybe that's just who they are and how they see the world. The question is whether you're willing to accept that reality or whether you're going to keep hoping they'll change. Her words were difficult to hear but necessary. I'd been operating under the assumption that my parents' disinterest in my achievements was temporary, something that could be overcome with the right accomplishment or milestone. But the evidence suggested otherwise. They'd had years to recognize my professional success, my personal growth, my happy relationship with Ryan, and my development into a capable, independent adult. If none of those things had earned their enthusiasm and pride, it was unlikely that my wedding day would suddenly change their perspective. That conversation with Mia marked a turning point in my thinking about the upcoming wedding. Instead of hoping my parents would rise to the occasion, I started preparing for the possibility that they'd continue to treat my celebration as a minor family obligation rather than a major milestone worthy of their full attention and support. The realization was painful but also liberating, because it allowed me to adjust my expectations and focus on the people who were genuinely excited to celebrate with Ryan and me. Ryan's parents had thrown themselves into wedding preparation with enthusiasm that reminded me what parental support actually looked like. Linda had offered to help with any tasks I needed assistance with, from addressing invitations to coordinating vendor deliveries. Tom had insisted on contributing to our celebration costs, explaining that he was honored to help make our special day as beautiful as possible. Both of them spoke about the wedding with genuine excitement, asking thoughtful questions about our plans and offering suggestions based on their own experience and genuine care for our happiness. The contrast between the Mitchell family's enthusiasm and my own parents' disinterest was impossible to ignore. Linda called regularly to check on wedding preparations and offer assistance with anything that seemed stressful or overwhelming. When I mentioned concerns about timing or logistics, she immediately began brainstorming solutions and offering practical help. When I shared excitement about details that were coming together beautifully, she celebrated with me as if my happiness were her own priority. Tom's involvement was equally supportive and genuine. He'd taken time off work to help with wedding setup, arranged for additional transportation for elderly relatives, and even offered to handle coordination with vendors on the wedding day so Ryan and I could focus on enjoying our celebration. His level of investment in our happiness stood in sharp contrast to Dennis's perfunctory attitude about walking me down the aisle and otherwise fulfilling his minimal parental obligations. The difference in family support became even more obvious as the wedding week arrived. Carol called once to confirm what time she needed to be ready and ask about parking arrangements, treating the day like any other social event she needed to attend. Dennis asked similar logistical questions without expressing any emotion about the significance of the occasion or his role in it. Neither of them offered to help with last-minute preparations, nor did they seem to understand that the week leading up to a wedding typically involves family members pitching in to ensure everything goes smoothly. Jessica, meanwhile, was completely absorbed in her own wedding preparations despite the fact that her celebration was still 6 months away. She called occasionally to update me on her latest planning developments, but these conversations always focused on her upcoming October wedding rather than my April celebration. When I mentioned feeling nervous or excited about my approaching wedding day, she'd offer generic reassurances before launching into detailed descriptions of her own vendor meetings and dress fittings. The family dynamic became crystallized during our final pre-wedding gathering, a casual dinner I'd organized for close family members who were in town early for the celebration. Ryan's parents arrived with flowers and champagne ready to toast our upcoming marriage and celebrate the beginning of our new life together. They'd brought photo albums from Ryan's childhood to share with me, and they spent the evening telling embarrassing stories about his youth and expressing how happy they were to welcome me into their family officially. My parents arrived on time but seemed distracted and somewhat uncomfortable with the intimate celebratory atmosphere Ryan's family had created. While Tom and Linda asked detailed questions about our honeymoon plans and future goals, Carol and Dennis made polite conversation without really engaging with the significance of the occasion. When Linda proposed a toast to Ryan and Emma's future happiness, they raised their glasses appropriately but without the emotional investment that characterized everything the Mitchells said and did. The evening highlighted the fundamental difference between families who were genuinely excited about their children's happiness and parents who were going through the motions of appropriate behavior. The Mitchells treated my wedding as a joyous family celebration worthy of emotional investment and enthusiastic participation. My parents treated it as a social obligation that required their presence but not necessarily their enthusiasm or full attention. That final family dinner forced me to acknowledge what I'd been avoiding for months. My parents were never going to celebrate my wedding the way they were planning to celebrate Jessica's. This wasn't about the size of the events or the complexity of the planning. This was about fundamental differences in how they valued their daughter's happiness and viewed their roles in our respective celebrations. Jessica's wedding was their family triumph. Mine was Emma's personal choice that deserved support but not investment. The realization was both devastating and clarifying. Devastating because it confirmed that my childhood perceptions about family favoritism had been accurate, and clarifying because it helped me understand what I was really dealing with as my wedding day approached. I wasn't going to get the enthusiastic, proud parents I'd always wanted, but I also didn't have to pretend that their lukewarm support was acceptable or sufficient. As I lay awake the night before my wedding, I made a decision that would change everything about the next day and potentially about my relationship with my family forever. I was done hoping they'd rise to the occasion, done pretending their disinterest didn't hurt, and done accepting treatment that fell far short of what I deserved from people who claimed to love me. If they couldn't celebrate my happiness authentically, maybe they didn't deserve to be part of my celebration at all. The decision felt both terrifying and empowering. Terrifying because it meant potentially confronting my parents in a way I'd never done before, and empowering because it meant finally standing up for my own worth and refusing to accept treatment that diminished my happiness on what should be the most important day of my life. Whatever happened next, I was done being the daughter who begged for crumbs of attention while watching her sister receive full banquets of family enthusiasm and support. My wedding day was going to be beautiful and meaningful with or without parents who could genuinely celebrate my happiness. But if they couldn't bring authentic joy and enthusiasm to my celebration, then maybe they didn't belong there at all. The little girl who had spent years hoping for their approval was finally ready to demand the respect and treatment she'd always deserved, regardless of the consequences that decision might bring. The morning of my wedding arrived with perfect California sunshine streaming through the windows of the bridal suite at Willow Creek Gardens. Mia had stayed with me the night before, and she was already awake when I opened my eyes, organizing beauty products and accessories for the day ahead. But instead of pure excitement, I felt a knot of anxiety that had nothing to do with normal pre-wedding jitters. I'd barely slept, replaying the decision I'd made in those quiet hours before dawn. The plan forming in my mind felt simultaneously justified and extreme. But every time I considered backing down, I remembered years of being overlooked and treated as secondary to Jessica's every accomplishment. This was my line in the sand. Mia noticed my distraction. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" she asked gently. "Emma, whatever you decide to do today, I'm behind you completely. You've earned the right to have a wedding day that's actually about celebrating you and Ryan." Ryan arrived mid-morning, technically breaking tradition, but neither of us cared. He could read my emotional state immediately and pulled me aside. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said quietly. I explained the decision I'd been wrestling with all night, the plan that had formed during those sleepless hours. Ryan listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful and supportive. "Your parents have had 26 years to treat you with respect and enthusiasm, and they've chosen not to," he said. "So if you want to take control of this situation and ensure your wedding day is actually about celebrating us, I support that completely. This is our day, and we get to determine who deserves to be part of it." His unconditional support gave me courage. I pulled out my phone and began making calls, starting with Marcus Chen, the security coordinator I'd worked with on dozens of weddings throughout my career. "Marcus, I need your help with something unusual," I said. I'm getting married today and I need you to prevent specific people from entering even if they have invitations and claim to be immediate family. Marcus paused. Emma, are you sure? Turning away family members can't be undone. I'm absolutely sure, I replied. I've spent my entire life being treated as secondary. If my parents can't bring genuine enthusiasm to my wedding, they don't deserve to be here at all. Marcus agreed, asking for detailed descriptions of my parents and Jessica. My next call was to Sandra Martinez, the venue coordinator who'd become a friend over the years. Sandra, I need to make last-minute changes to the guest list. 3 people who were originally invited are no longer welcome. Sandra was quiet before responding. Emma, I've known you for years. If you're taking this step, I trust you have good reasons. Consider it handled. My final call was to Father Michael Torres, the officiant. I needed him to know about the changes so he wouldn't be caught off guard. When I explained the situation, he was quiet before responding with unexpected wisdom. Emma, we cannot control other people's capacity for love. We can only control who we allow into our most sacred spaces. Protecting your wedding day from half-hearted participation is an act of self-respect, not cruelty. His validation eased the guilt nagging at me. With security arrangements finalized, I realized Dennis could no longer walk me down the aisle. I asked Tom Mitchell to fill that role instead. When I called to explain what was happening, Tom's response was immediate. Emma, it would be the greatest honor of my life. You've brought so much joy to Ryan's life and to our family. His words broke through my emotional control, and I found myself crying as I thanked him. Tom's willingness to step in without hesitation reminded me that family wasn't just about shared DNA. It was about showing up and offering genuine support. As the morning progressed through hair, makeup, and dressing, I cycled through emotions from empowered confidence to nauseating anxiety. Mia recognized my internal struggle and pulled me aside. Emma, if you let your parents attend today, what will actually happen? Will they suddenly become engaged and enthusiastic? Or will they go through the motions while mentally being elsewhere, creating an atmosphere that will haunt your wedding photos? Her questions cut through my uncertainty. She was right. Allowing my parents to attend wouldn't transform them into supportive parents. You're protecting yourself from more hurt. Mia continued. You're choosing to have a celebration filled with people who genuinely love you. That's not cruel. That's self-respect. As noon approached and guests began arriving, I watched from the window as Marcus's security team took positions at the entrance. They looked professional and unobtrusive, checking names against the approved list while offering warm welcomes. The scene looked normal and festive with no indication of the dramatic confrontation that might unfold. Around 1 o'clock, just as the ceremony was scheduled to begin, my phone rang with Carol's number. My heart rate accelerated as I stared at the device. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Emma, where are you? Carol's voice sounded confused and irritated. We're at Willow Creek Gardens, but the security guard says we're not on the approved guest list. Obviously there's been some mistake, so could you please come straighten this out? The assumption that this was an administrative error was almost laughable. There's no mistake, Mom, I said calmly. You, Dad, and Jessica are not welcome at my wedding. I've arranged for security to prevent your entry because I'd rather have empty chairs than family members who are mentally planning Jessica's celebration instead of genuinely participating in mine. Long silence. When Carol finally spoke, her voice had shifted to shocked disbelief. Emma, what are you talking about? Of course we want to be at your wedding. Whatever you think we've done wrong, we can discuss after the ceremony, but you can't seriously exclude your own parents. The manipulation was subtle but unmistakable. She was framing my decision as unreasonable rather than acknowledging years of treatment that led to this moment. Mom, this isn't a rash decision, I replied steadily. This is the result of 26 years of being treated as less important than Jessica, of having my achievements dismissed while hers are celebrated. You've had months to engage with my wedding planning with genuine enthusiasm, and instead you've been distracted by an event that's still half a year away. I could hear Dennis in the background, then Jessica's voice joining. You called my wedding plans nices while throwing yourself into every detail of Jessica's celebration. I continued. You offered modest financial support for mine while apparently opening your wallets without limit for hers. You've made it clear through your actions that Jessica's happiness is worth your investment while mine deserves polite acknowledgement. Carol's response mixed denial and justification. Emma, you're misunderstanding our intentions. We love both daughters equally. Jessica's wedding is more complex, but that doesn't mean we don't care about yours. We're here now, aren't we? You're turning us away over some perceived slight. The word perceived triggered something in me. In her mind, the problem wasn't her years of favoritism. The problem was my perception of those actions. You're not here because you're excited to celebrate Ryan and me, I said, my voice hardening. You're here out of obligation, but I don't want parents at my wedding who are present out of duty while wishing they were somewhere else. Dennis took the phone, his voice carrying authoritative tone. Emma, this is ridiculous. We're your parents, and we have every right to attend your wedding. Now call off your security people before you ruin your own wedding day with this childish tantrum. His characterization of my boundary setting as a childish tantrum was perfectly on brand. Dad, I'm not ruining my wedding day, I replied evenly. I'm protecting it from people who have consistently shown they can't celebrate my happiness authentically. You and Mom have made your priorities clear. Jessica's October wedding is what matters to you. Jessica grabbed the phone next, her voice mixing confusion and irritation. Emma, what is going on? You can't seriously be this petty over perceived favoritism. Mom and Dad love us both, and you're being completely unreasonable by excluding them over some imaginary slight. There it was again, perceived coupled with imaginary. Jessica, you've never had to compete for attention because you've always been the priority, I said. You've never watched your achievements be dismissed while someone else's smaller victories were celebrated. So I don't expect you to understand. But this is my decision, and it's final. Carol came back with a pleading tone. Emma, please don't do this. If you exclude us from your wedding, you're creating a rift that might never heal. Think about what you're doing and what it will mean for the future. She was making me responsible for the relationship damage rather than acknowledging their years of favoritism created this situation. Mom, I have thought about what I'm doing, I replied firmly. I've thought about it for years, every time you dismissed my achievements. And I've decided that I deserve better than family members who are physically present but emotionally absent. Dennis's voice turned hard with anger. This is your last chance to reconsider. If we walk away from this entrance, you need to understand there will be consequences. You'll be making a choice about what kind of relationship you want with your family. His threat was meant to scare me into compliance. But he'd miscalculated badly. I understand exactly what I'm choosing, I said quietly. I'm choosing self-respect over acceptance of treatment that diminishes my worth. I'm choosing to surround myself with people who genuinely celebrate my happiness. And I'm choosing to start my marriage by refusing to allow people who can't support me authentically to participate in the most important day of my life. Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Dad. Goodbye, Jessica. I ended the call before they could respond, my hands shaking. The finality washed over me in waves of conflicting emotions. Relief that I'd finally stood up for myself. Anxiety about permanent consequences. Sadness that my family couldn't be who I needed them to be. Pride that I'd valued myself enough to demand better. Mia wrapped me in a tight hug. You did the right thing, she whispered. That took incredible courage. Ryan appeared moments later and pulled me into his arms. I'm so proud of you, he murmured. You just showed more strength than most people demonstrate in a lifetime. Now let's go get married, surrounded by people who actually deserve to witness our happiness. His words steadied me, reminding me why I'd made this choice. This was about protecting my joy and refusing to allow people who couldn't celebrate me authentically to diminish the most important day of my life. As I took one final look in the mirror, I saw not the daughter who had spent years begging for approval, but the woman who had finally learned to value herself enough to demand respect. My parents were probably driving away from Willow Creek Gardens right now, angry and confused. Emma did that. Emma did that. But I was about to walk down the aisle toward a man who loved me unconditionally, surrounded by people who genuinely celebrated my happiness. And that was worth any price I might pay in family relationships that had never truly nourished me anyway. 20 minutes later, I stood at the entrance to the garden ceremony space, my arm linked through Tom Mitchell's as soft music floated through the air. The chairs were filled with faces that radiated genuine warmth and excitement. Friends from college, professional colleagues who had become family. Ryan's extended relatives who had welcomed me without hesitation, and Mrs. Rodriguez sitting in the front row dabbing her eyes with a tissue. The 3 empty chairs on what should have been my family's side of the aisle were visible, but they didn't feel like a void. They felt like space I'd reclaimed, room for people who actually deserved to be there rather than obligation fillers who would have cast shadows over everything. Several guests had quietly asked about my parents' absence, and word had spread quickly through the whispered grapevine that something significant had happened. But the overall atmosphere remained joyful and celebratory. Tom squeezed my arm gently as the music shifted to the processional. "Ready?" he asked softly. I nodded, feeling surprisingly calm despite everything that had transpired in the past hour. As we began walking down the aisle, I caught Ryan's expression at the altar, his eyes filled with love and pride and complete acceptance of everything I was. The ceremony itself was beautiful in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Father Torres spoke about the families we choose and the love we cultivate rather than simply inherit. His words felt personally crafted for this exact moment, acknowledging that marriage wasn't just about joining 2 people but about creating new definitions of family based on mutual respect and genuine support. Several guests wiped away tears during his homily about the courage it takes to honor yourself while still remaining open to love. When Ryan and I exchanged vows, I felt the weight of my earlier decision lift slightly. His promises to support my dreams, celebrate my victories, and stand beside me through every challenge reminded me why I'd been willing to risk family relationships that had never truly nourished me. This partnership, this commitment we were making to each other, was built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine enthusiasm for each other's happiness. It was everything my parents' presence at this ceremony could never have provided. The kiss that sealed our marriage was met with enthusiastic applause and cheers from guests who were genuinely invested in our happiness. As we walked back down the aisle together, I made eye contact with Mia, who was crying and grinning simultaneously. Mrs. Rodriguez blew me a kiss, her face radiating maternal pride that my own mother had never managed to express. Linda Mitchell reached out to squeeze my hand as we passed, whispering welcome to the family officially. The reception was everything I'd hoped it would be. The Willow Creek Gardens had been transformed into an elegant outdoor celebration space with string lights, flowing white curtains, and centerpieces featuring my favorite flowers. The photography I'd planned so carefully captured genuine moments of joy rather than forced family portraits with people who wished they were elsewhere. Every detail reflected Ryan's and my personalities, our shared aesthetic, our vision for the life we were building together. During the cocktail hour, several guests approached me privately to express their support for whatever had happened with my family. Mrs. Rodriguez pulled me aside and said quietly, "I don't know exactly what occurred today, but I know you well enough to trust that you did what was necessary. You've always had good judgment, Emma, even when others couldn't see it." Kevin, my cousin who had witnessed years of family favoritism, was more direct. "I heard your parents got turned away at the entrance," he said, his voice low so others wouldn't overhear. "Good for you. I've watched them treat you like you didn't matter for your entire life. It's about time someone in this family stood up and said it wasn't acceptable." His validation meant more than he probably realized. Kevin had grown up observing the same family dynamics I'd experienced, and his confirmation that my perceptions had been accurate helped counter the guilt that kept trying to resurface. I wasn't being oversensitive or unreasonable. I was finally responding appropriately to treatment that had been wrong all along. The reception dinner featured speeches from Ryan's best man and Mia as my maid of honor. Notably absent were the traditional parent speeches that typically bookmark wedding celebrations. Instead, Tom Mitchell stood and offered a toast that brought tears to many eyes. He spoke about the privilege of watching Ryan fall in love with me, about the joy of welcoming a daughter who brought creativity and compassion into their family, and about his pride in walking me down the aisle earlier that day. His words carried the parental love and pride I'd always craved from Dennis, and hearing them publicly acknowledged what the Mitchell family had given me that my own never had. Linda added her own brief remarks about gaining not just a daughter-in-law but a true daughter of the heart. "Emma, you've brought so much light into our lives," she said, her voice catching with emotion. "We're honored that you've chosen to build your future with Ryan, and we promise to always support and celebrate you both." The sincerity in her words stood in sharp contrast to the obligatory sentiments my own parents might have offered had they been present. As the evening progressed through dinner, dancing, and cake cutting, I found myself genuinely enjoying every moment rather than anxiously monitoring my parents' reactions or trying to read their level of engagement. The absence of that stress allowed me to be fully present with Ryan, with our friends, with the celebration we'd worked so hard to create. This was what a wedding should feel like, I realized. Pure joy without the undercurrent of family tension and emotional management. During our first dance, Ryan pulled me close and whispered, "No regrets." I thought about the question seriously before answering. "None," I replied honestly. "This day has been perfect because it's been filled with people who actually want to be here. That's worth more than forcing a relationship with people who can only offer obligation." As the reception wound down and guests began departing with warm hugs and congratulations, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't expected. Yes, I'd made a dramatic choice that would have lasting consequences for my relationship with my parents and sister. Yes, there would be fallout and difficult conversations and probably years of family tension ahead. But I'd also drawn a line that desperately needed drawing, and I'd protected the most important day of my life from people who would have diminished it through their half-hearted participation. The wedding photos we'd receive in a few weeks would show genuine smiles and authentic joy rather than forced family portraits with people mentally planning someone else's celebration. The memories I'd carry forward would be of support and love rather than disappointment and invisible wounds. And the foundation Ryan and I had built for our marriage was strengthened by my willingness to prioritize our happiness over family obligation and social convention. As we prepared to leave the reception for our wedding night, Mia hugged me tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "You chose yourself today, and that took more courage than most people ever manage." Her words captured exactly what I'd done. After 26 years of accepting treatment that diminished my worth, I'd finally chosen to value myself enough to demand better. The cost had been high, but the alternative would have been higher still. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.